Hey everyone, I'm AfterMoon Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story number 1. I had pulled into that gas station out of routine, not out of need. My car had half a tank, but I liked to keep it topped up. It gave me a sense of control, like I was never at the mercy of an empty gauge. The place was small, tucked off a quiet road in Napier, and I'd been there enough times that I knew the layout without thinking. What unsettled me wasn't the pumps or the shop, but the van. A rusty old thing, pale green with brown streaks of rot, always parked in the same corner near the edge of the lot. It never moved. At first, I assumed it belonged to someone who worked there, maybe a mechanic or a part-time clerk. But after the fourth or fifth time of seeing it, I started to notice the details. The tires never seemed to change, the dust never shifted, and the front windshield had streaks like something had slid down the inside. The first night I really noticed it, I kept glancing at it while fueling. The headlights were faint, not bright, but as if they caught reflections from nothing. It made me nervous, but I brushed it off. Maybe they flickered from a wiring issue. People drove beat-up cars all the time. Still, when I went inside to pay, I asked the clerk if anyone owned that van. He shrugged and said, "Old guy comes by sometimes. Haven't seen him in a while." He said it like it wasn't his problem, and I left it at that. But then, it became a pattern. I started using that gas station regularly. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to prove to myself the van was nothing strange. Yet every night, there it was, angled slightly toward the pumps, like it was waiting. I told myself I was imagining the way it seemed closer some nights, or how the headlights dimmed and brightened with no one near it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked too long, I'd catch someone staring back. The night everything shifted, I was alone. It was late, later than usual, and the shop was empty except for the clerk, half asleep on his stool. I pulled in and stopped at the pump nearest the exit, as far from the van as I could manage. Even then, I felt its presence, like eyes boring into me from the corner of the lot. I tried to ignore it, telling myself not to be paranoid, but my gaze drifted over anyway, and that's when I realized the driver's side window was down. Just a crack, but enough that I could see a pale shape inside. My throat tightened. It looked like a face, leaning against the glass. I froze, nozzle still in my hand, waiting for the figure to move. Nothing did. My mind raced. Maybe someone was sleeping, maybe it was a mannequin, maybe I was letting my nerves spin a harmless detail into something sinister. I forced myself to finish fueling, shoved the nozzle back, and walked quickly into the shop. I tried to sound casual when I asked the clerk, "Do you know if someone's in that van tonight?" He barely looked up. "Nah, that thing's been sitting there for weeks." His indifference frustrated me, but also terrified me. If it wasn't his, and he didn't care, then what the hell was it doing there? I should have left. I should have just gotten in my car and driven off. But curiosity clawed at me. By the time I stepped outside, my body was buzzing with adrenaline. The van's headlights flickered faintly again, no engine running, no one moving. I walked toward my car, but instead of getting in, I turned, slowly, and started walking toward the van. Every step made me feel like I was pushing into something I had no right to disturb, but I couldn't stop. When I reached it, the smell hit me first. Sweet, cloying, rotten. My stomach turned and I covered my nose with my sleeve. The driver's side window was cracked enough for me to peer inside, and that's when I saw him. An old man, slumped against the wheel, his face gray and sagging, eyes half open but clouded. His skin looked waxy, stretched tight around his jaw. He wasn't alive. He couldn't be. My breath came short, and I stumbled back, gagging. Before I could scream or run, the headlights flared bright. They didn't just flicker, they turned on full, blinding me. I threw my hands over my face and staggered backward. The engine never started, and the van never made a sound, but those lights stayed on as if the dead man had flicked them himself. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. I forced myself to the shop, stumbling inside and shouting for the clerk. He looked startled when I grabbed his arm and said, "There's a dead man in that van. Call someone." He frowned, annoyed, but when I dragged him outside, the headlights were still blazing. He walked closer, muttering under his breath, but as soon as he leaned in to look, his face drained of color. He stumbled back, shaking his head. "Jesus Christ, I didn't think." He ran inside to call the police. I stayed rooted in place, unable to tear my eyes away. The old man hadn't shifted. His body was still slumped, lifeless. But the lights dimmed and brightened again, like breathing. I whispered out loud, "You're dead. You can't be doing this." My voice shook so badly it barely sounded like me. The police arrived within minutes. They pulled me aside, asked what I'd seen, and I told them everything. I expected disbelief, but they didn't argue. Instead, they looked grim, almost like they weren't surprised. They opened the van carefully, one officer covering his mouth against the smell. The body was stiff, long dead. One of the officers muttered to the other, "At least a week, maybe 2. But when I asked about the headlights, they wouldn't answer. They avoided my eyes, closed the doors, and started stringing up tape. I thought that was the end of it, that I'd told my story, shaken as I was, and I could finally go home. But as I walked back to my car, I noticed something that chilled me more than anything else. On my windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a slip of paper. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was a fuel receipt, faded and crumpled. Printed across it, in smeared ink, was the same date but from exactly 1 year earlier. And the customer name printed on the card? Mine, my full name. I nearly dropped it. My first instinct was to scream at the officers, show them, beg for answers. But when I looked up, their expressions told me not to. They knew something. They wanted me gone. One officer walked over, voice firm but oddly kind. "Go home. Don't come back here." I didn't argue. I drove away, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. In my rearview mirror, the van's headlights glowed one last time, a pair of eyes following me until the station disappeared. I never returned to that place. I found other gas stations, even if it meant driving out of my way. For months, I kept that receipt in a drawer, too afraid to touch it but unable to throw it away. Finally, one night, I burned it in, my sink, watching the ink curl and fade into ash. But even then, the smell of rot seemed to cling to the air, like it had followed me home. Years have passed, and I still see that van in my dreams. Always parked in the corner, always waiting, headlights flickering in the dark. And every time I wake up, I can't help checking my car windows, half expecting another receipt tucked under the wiper with my name printed on it. Because I know, deep down, that night wasn't just coincidence. That van wasn't abandoned. It was looking for me. And maybe it still is. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. Story number 2. I was already tired when I pulled my truck into the gas station on the outskirts of Ostrava. It was the kind of stop I'd made 100 times before. Fill up, grab a coffee, keep rolling. My company had given me a tight schedule that night, and I remember thinking that if I didn't get a quick refill and a receipt to log it, I'd be dealing with payroll headaches all week. The place was quiet. Just one other car parked near the convenience store doors, but the pumps were still lit, so I pulled up, slid out, and swiped my card. Everything seemed normal until the machine spat out the receipt. That's when I saw it. Printed at the bottom, right where my name and truck ID should have been, it read, "Customer #40 not found." At first, I laughed under my breath. Some computer glitch, I thought. I stuffed the receipt into my pocket, climbed back into the cab, and got ready to roll. But the second I looked at my logbook to jot down the transaction, a weird chill slid through me. My name and truck ID section was blank, completely blank. I flipped through the earlier pages, they were fine, all properly filled in, but tonight's entry refused to take ink. I pressed my pen harder, tried a different pen, even traced over the spot. The paper dented under the pressure, but no ink stuck to my name line. My hands started to sweat as I slammed the book shut. I told myself it didn't matter. I had the receipt. That was proof enough. I pulled back onto the road, but as I drove, I couldn't shake it. I kept touching my pocket, feeling the thin slip of paper like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Hours later, I rolled up to the checkpoint where my company usually scanned our IDs before logging us into the system. I handed my license to the guard like always. He frowned, squinted at it, and shook his head. "This is blank," he said. I leaned forward, confused. "No, it's not. That's my license. Look again." He tilted it under the specid light, but there was no name, no photo, no number, just the outline of a check ID card with empty white space where my details should have been. Panic bloomed in my chest. I snatched it back, but it was true. It looked real in shape and texture, but it had no identity printed on it. "You'll need to step out of the truck," the guard said carefully. His tone was halfway between authority and unease. I could feel his eyes darting between me and the silent dark road behind. I climbed down, my legs heavy, and tried to explain. "I just filled up in Ostrava, maybe the system," but he cut me off. "Ostrava? Our scanners haven't logged anyone from there tonight." He glanced at the paper in my hand, the blank license, and pulled his radio to his mouth. I didn't wait for whatever call he was making. Something primal screamed inside me to get out of there. I jumped back in the cab and slammed it into gear before he could react. My hands shook on the wheel. Every instinct told me I was driving away from something bigger than a clerical error. I reached for the company login card. We all carried plastic, coated with employee numbers, but when I slid it through the reader in my cab, the screen flashed. 404, record not found. I tried again, harder this time, but the same error blinked back at me. I cursed and pulled over. My breathing grew shallow. I dug for my paper's delivery schedule, company ID, insurance, and one by one, every sheet was blank, not erased, not scribbled out, just white, like no ink had ever touched them. I don't know how long I sat there on the roadside, staring at that stack of ghost documents. My pulse hammered so loud I could barely hear the occasional car whoosh past. Finally, I remembered the receipt. That stupid slip with the joke error. My fingers tore through my pocket until I felt it. Relief surged until I looked at it again. The paper was still there, but the ink was gone, just a small strip of white. Nothingness, as blank as the rest. I screamed. Not out of anger, but from the hollow realization that I was being erased in real time. I threw the wheel and headed for the nearest town, hoping someone, anyone, would recognize me. I stopped at a diner that I'd visited before. I remembered the waitress, Anna, who always served coffee with too much sugar. I rushed in, called her name. She turned, looked straight through me, then asked if I needed a table for one. My heart split. She had no recognition in her eyes. None. I tried again at a gas station down the road. Different clerk, different place. "Do you have a public phone?" I asked. He shrugged. "There's no phone here." I pointed directly to the payphone mounted on the wall behind him, but when I walked over, it was gone. Just smooth plaster, no marks, as though it had never been installed. I staggered back. He raised his brow at me, annoyed. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, but he didn't call me by name. He didn't even ask for it. By then, fear gave way to fury. I ran back to my truck and pulled out my wallet. Every card, bank, insurance, license was blank. My photo was gone. My name was gone. Even the crumpled receipts from earlier trips had faded to white. Only the cash remained, meaningless and heavy in my hand. I pounded the dashboard, shouting my name into the cab again and again, just to hear it spoken somewhere. But with every repetition, the word felt thinner, like I was carving it into smoke. The road stretched out in front of me, familiar yet alien. My truck still ran, my body still functioned, but I felt like I was driving without a past. No anchor, no record. I thought about my family, my sister in Brno, my old school friends, and terror struck me cold. What if they didn't know me anymore? What if I showed up at my sister's door and she looked at me like a stranger? My knuckles turned white on the wheel as I drove through the night with no destination, just clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, would remember. When dawn broke, I reached a government office in a nearby town. I rushed inside, desperate. "Please," I begged the clerk, slamming my hands on the counter. "Check the system. My name is..." But when I spoke, the sound cut off in my throat. The word never made it out. My lips moved, but no sound came. I tried again, harder, but it was like my name didn't exist anymore. The clerk frowned politely. "Sir, I need a name to process any request." My mouth opened, but nothing came. No name, nothing. I stumbled backward, clutching my throat. I could still speak other words. I said help. I said please, but not my name, not who I was. The woman at the desk leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "You need to calm down." But I couldn't calm down. I bolted from the office, heart exploding in my chest, and collapsed against my truck in the parking lot. My hands trembled as I pressed them to my face, whispering nonsense just to hear my voice still existed. That's when I noticed the final detail. My truck. The plates were gone, just smooth metal, no numbers, no letters. Even the logo of the company had vanished from the side. It was an empty white shell of steel, my last proof of belonging wiped clean. I crumpled to the ground and pressed my forehead to the gravel. For a long time, I stayed there, crying silently, because I knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a joke, it was deletion. Somewhere, somehow, I had been removed. Line by line, file by file, until nothing of me remained. And I understood then why the receipt had mocked me. Customer #404 not found. It wasn't an error code, it was a verdict. In the end, I drove north until the fuel ran out. Nobody stopped me, nobody asked for ID, because nobody saw me. I parked the truck on an empty stretch of road, stepped out, and waited. My reflection in the mirror glass of the cab was already fading, softer and softer, until I could barely make out the outline. I whispered my name one last time, though it made no sound. And then, even that whisper was gone. Story number 3. I pulled off the road with a dry mouth and a headache that had been building for hours. The drive through Rotorua had been longer than expected, and by the time I spotted a small gas station, I felt desperate to stretch my legs and grab something sugary to keep me awake. The place wasn't busy, just a single car pulling out as I parked. The sign above the shop flickered weakly, but I didn't think much of it. All I wanted was a soda, maybe a snack, and to get back on the road. I wasn't expecting anything strange. I wasn't expecting the man with the smile. As soon as I pushed open the glass door, I noticed him behind the counter. The man stood unnervingly still, hands folded neatly in front of him. What caught me off guard wasn't his posture, though, but his face. He wore what looked like a mask, a glossy white piece that covered his whole face, shaped into a stretched, permanent smile. Not like a clown mask, not painted, just molded plastic, smooth and expressionless, except for that grin. For a second, I thought maybe it was part of some promotion or a prank. I gave a small laugh under my breath, waiting for him to move or explain. He didn't. I tried to ignore it. I walked toward the fridges, grabbed a cold soda, and then wandered over to the snack aisle. I caught myself glancing back at him several times. He hadn't shifted. He just stood there, staring straight ahead with that mask. His chest rose and fell slightly, so at least he was breathing. I muttered to myself, "What the hell?" trying to brush off the tension that was already crawling across my skin. When I set the bottle and a packet of chips on the counter, he tilted his head slowly, as if curious about me. His movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed. Finally, in a muffled voice behind the mask, he said, "Good evening." The words were calm, but the way the mask smiled made the tone feel wrong, like the face wasn't matching the voice. I forced a polite smile. "Hey, just these." My voice cracked slightly. He scanned the items without looking down, his masked gaze fixed on me. The scanner beeped, and he placed the items in a bag with exaggerated care. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Management requires it," he said. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. I blinked. "Requires what?" I asked. He lifted one gloved hand to tap the mask's cheek. "This." He tilted his head again. "We must smile for customers. Always smile. Always." I laughed awkwardly, trying to play along. "Bit creepy though, isn't it?" His reply was quick, cutting through my fake humor. "But yours fits better." Something about that sentence stuck in my chest. I felt an immediate chill, like he knew something I didn't. I grabbed my bag, shoved some coins on the counter, and muttered, "Thanks." He stood perfectly still, watching as I turned for the door. I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my head, that frozen smile never blinking, never softening. When I got outside, I tried to shake it off. People were weird. Maybe it was some local tradition, or maybe he was just eccentric. But as I opened my car door, I saw the reflection in the window. His masked face stood right behind me, impossibly close, though when I spun around, no one was there. My heart slammed in my chest. The store door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard footsteps. The counter was empty. I forced myself into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands shook on the wheel. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was the reflection of a poster inside the store. Maybe I'd imagined it. But when I glanced back through the glass front, he was there again behind the counter, head tilted at the same angle as before, staring out at me like he hadn't moved at all. I drove away too fast, chewing on my lip, telling myself it was over. 10 minutes down the highway, I took a sip of the soda. That's when I noticed the straw. I hadn't bought a straw, but sticking out of the bottle's opening was a thin, translucent tube, like someone had slipped it in before sealing the cap. My stomach dropped. I pulled the car over, hands trembling, and inspected it. The seal was broken, clearly peeled back and smoothed over. A sour smell rose from the liquid. I tossed it out onto the gravel and spat several times, gagging, praying I hadn't swallowed anything. The chips bag felt lighter than normal, so I opened it too. Inside were not crisps but folded slips of white paper. Each one bore the same line in neat black print. "Yours fits better." I felt sick. I didn't want to go back to the station, but part of me needed answers. I needed to know what had just happened. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I turned the car around. The station was darker now, its sign completely dead. The lot was empty. I parked hesitantly, keeping the engine running. The glass doors were locked, and the inside was dim, but I could still make out the counter. The mask lay there, resting neatly on the surface, as if waiting for me. Behind the counter, no one moved. I should have driven away. I should have left it there. But my legs carried me out of the car, across the lot, up to the door. I pressed my forehead against the glass, trying to see deeper inside. That's when I realized the mask wasn't lying flat. It was propped upright, and beneath it, faintly visible, was a reflection of my own face, smiling back at me. I stumbled back, panic flooding my chest. My own face, grinning that same stretched grin, staring through the glass. I ran to the car and slammed the door. When I looked into the rearview mirror, my stomach flipped. My lips had curled into the same rigid smile. I couldn't relax them, no matter how hard I tried. My cheeks ached. My jaw locked in place. I screamed, but the sound came out muffled, like I was shouting from behind plastic. I don't remember the rest of the drive clearly. I remember gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white, tears streaming down my face, that smile hurting me every second. By the time I reached my motel, it had faded slightly, enough to let me close my mouth, but the ache lingered. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked wrong. My mouth moved normally, but my eyes seemed to shine with something else, something not mine. That night, I dreamed of the cashier. I dreamed of standing behind the counter, my hands folded, my face hidden by that same mask. In the dream, customers came and went, and each time, I told them the same words: "Management requires it. Yours fits better." When I woke, the dream felt like a memory. My clothes smelled faintly of plastic. I threw the chips bag, the receipt, everything from that stop into the trash. I told myself to forget it. Just a bad encounter, just exhaustion. But even now, years later, sometimes my reflection smiles when I don't. Sometimes I catch my face tilted at that same angle in photographs, as if waiting for someone to notice. And every now and then, when I walk into a shop and approach the counter, I feel it again, that weight, that demand to smile, as if someone behind me is whispering, "Management requires it." And each time, my lips curl on their own, fitting the grin I never asked for. That's why I don't stop at gas stations anymore. I fill my tank during the day. I avoid the small ones on lonely roads. Because I can't shake the feeling that if I ever see another masked cashier, he'll recognize me. He'll see his replacement. He'll know I've been carrying the smile all along. Story number 4. I pushed open the heavy glass door with my shoulder, clutching a half-empty bottle of water and trying to steady my head after the party. The place was nearly silent, just the hum of refrigerators and the faint click of a clock behind the counter. At first, nothing seemed strange, just a tired clerk behind the register, a couple of aisles of crisps and sweets, and the faint smell of gasoline seeping in through the sliding door that hadn't quite closed all the way. I was more focused on finding something salty to soak up the alcohol, still churning in my stomach, than paying attention to anything else. But then I noticed it. Every mirror I passed was cracked, splintered, or entirely smashed. The one above the cigarettes behind the counter, broken. The one near the door where people usually fixed their hair, spiderwebbed into shards. Even the little convex mirror, meant to deter shoplifters, had been shattered into pieces that clung to the frame like a jagged halo. I slowed down, walking more carefully, my trainers squeaking slightly on the tiled floor. The strangest part was that no one had cleaned any of it up. Glass littered the corners and glistened faintly under the fluorescent lights. I caught the clerk's eye as I passed him. He didn't speak, just raised his chin in a slight nod, as if to say, "Go on." His face looked blank, but not tired, more like drained, like all the life had been sucked out of his expression. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe there had been some drunk vandal earlier, maybe a fight, maybe the mirrors were just too expensive to replace quickly. But the longer I walked down the aisle, the more I couldn't shake how deliberate it looked. Every single mirror smashed, as if someone had gone through one by one, making sure there wasn't a single reflection left intact. I grabbed a packet of crisps and a chocolate bar, shoving them under my arm, and headed toward the bathroom at the back. I don't know why I thought going in there would make sense. Maybe I just wanted to splash some water on my face and steady myself before walking home. I pushed the bathroom door open, and that's when the hairs on my arms lifted. The mirror above the sink was untouched, perfect, clear, not a scratch on it. I froze in the doorway, crisps crinkling in my arm, staring at my reflection, staring back at me. It was normal, at first. My flushed cheeks, smudged eyeliner, hair a little messy. I leaned forward, setting my things down on the counter, and put both hands on the sink. My reflection did the same, but a second late. Not subtle, not a trick of my eyes. I moved, and then it moved, like a badly dubbed film. My breath caught. I pulled back quickly, heart hammering in my chest. I turned my head side to side, waved my hand, even blinked rapidly, but every movement echoed back at me, just slightly too late. The sound of water dripping from the tap made the silence between me and that mirror unbearable. I whispered, "What the hell?" But even then, my lips in the glass formed the words after mine had already closed. I stumbled backward, knocking my shoulder into the doorframe. The crisps tumbled to the floor. My first thought was that maybe I was still drunk, that the party had blurred my vision. But I felt sharp, too sharp. Every sound, every movement was painfully clear. I wanted to leave. I reached for the door handle, but something made me glance back one more time. My reflection wasn't still this time, it was staring straight at me, even though I wasn't facing the mirror anymore. My body was half turned, hand on the door, but the reflection's eyes were fixed forward, locked onto mine. And then, very slowly, it smiled. My stomach lurched, and I shoved the door open, bolting out into the shop. My shoes slipped slightly on the tile, and the clerk glanced up, finally showing something on his face: fear. Not curiosity, not confusion. Fear. "You saw it," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid someone else might hear. His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in hours. I stopped dead, hugging the chocolate bar to my chest like some kind of shield. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me didn't want the answer. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and shook his head. "The mirrors, they don't break because of accidents. They're broken because it gets through them. That one in the bathroom's still strong." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to admit he was winding me up, but his face stayed pale and tight. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, could feel my hands trembling. I didn't even know what it meant, but my brain filled in the blanks. Something not me, not human, but wearing my face. I backed toward the door, but the automatic sensor didn't catch me. The glass doors stayed firmly shut. I pushed against them, but they didn't budge. I turned back toward the clerk. He was already shaking. His head again. "It doesn't let people leave if they've seen." I felt my throat tighten, panic clawing its way up. "Open it," I demanded, my voice cracking. He didn't move. He just sat there, hunched, eyes fixed on me like he'd seen this before, many times. My stomach dropped. How many others had walked into that bathroom? How many never walked out the same? I picked my crisps off the floor and hurled them at the counter, more to do something with my shaking hands than anything else. They bounced off the plastic divider and landed on the floor. He flinched like he expected something worse. I turned back toward the bathroom. The door was ajar now, though I had left it wide open. The mirror inside glowed faintly, not from any light in the room, but like the surface itself was alive. I could see movement in it, even from where I stood, my reflection, pacing the small bathroom, even though I was frozen in the shop. It was pacing like a caged animal, hands twitching, eyes wild. And then it stopped, turned toward me, and lifted its hand in a beckoning gesture. The clerk muttered something under his breath, but I couldn't make it out. My legs moved before my brain caught up, dragging me closer to that door. I wanted to resist, wanted to run, but each step felt pulled out of me, like strings attached to my ankles. My reflection grinned wide now, teeth bared, as if it knew I couldn't stop. My hand brushed the edge of the bathroom door, and the reflection mirrored me perfectly, no delay this time. It reached out, palm pressed flat against the inside of the glass, waiting for me. I don't know what broke me free, maybe the sound of glass crunching under my foot, maybe the clerk's strangled gasp, but I tore my hand back and slammed the bathroom door shut. The mirror inside rattled violently, as if something slammed against it from the other side. I backed away fast, nearly tripping over my own feet. The clerk was already on his knees behind the counter, hands pressed over his ears. The whole shop seemed to vibrate, every broken shard of glass humming like a tuning fork. And then, all at once, it stopped. The bathroom fell silent. My chest heaved, breath ragged. I looked at the clerk, waiting for him to explain, to tell me what to do, but he just shook his head, tears in his eyes. "You made it angry," he whispered. "Now it'll wait." That was the moment I understood why all the other mirrors had been smashed, why no one dared leave them intact. If there's no reflection, there's nowhere for it to appear. No doorway for it to step through. Only one mirror had been left whole, and I'd walked straight into it like a fool. The door sensors clicked then, breaking me out of my daze. The sliding glass opened smoothly, like nothing had been wrong at all. My body acted before my mind could question it. I ran, sprinting out into the empty lot, lungs burning, heart in my throat. I didn't stop until my legs nearly gave out, until the lights of the station were far behind me. When I finally staggered to a stop and dared to look back, the building sat quiet and ordinary in the distance. But I swear I saw someone in the glass of the door, me, standing perfectly still, smiling. I never went back. I never even walked past that road again. To this day, I cover every mirror in my flat at night. I can't stand the thought of one being left open, waiting. Because I know it's still out there, biding its time, waiting for the next crack in the glass, and maybe next time, it won't wait a second late. It'll be right there, moving with me, ready to take my place. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 5. I was 13 the night it happened, and I remember because I had just started biking farther from home, testing the edges of freedom my parents reluctantly gave me. The gas station on Tay Street was my usual turning point. It wasn't anything special, 2 pumps, a flickering sign, and a payphone by the side wall. I stopped there more often than I needed, partly because it felt like the last safe place before the stretch of road that turned into farmland. That night, though, something about the quiet around the station made me want to hear my dad's voice before I rode home. I propped my bike against the wall, dug out a few coins from my pocket, and slipped them into the slot of the payphone. The receiver was cool against my ear, and the low hum of the line steadied me. I dialed our home number. It rang once, twice, and then clicked as someone picked up. My father's voice came through, but it wasn't right. The words were clear, but there was no warmth, none of the easy tone he usually had when he said hello. Instead, he said my name with a strange edge, as though he were standing just behind me, testing the sound of it. "Dad?" I asked, feeling a wave of relief anyway, because it was his voice. "It's me. I'm at the station. Just wanted to check in before I came home." There was a pause. Then the line hissed with a crackle, and he said, almost whispering, "Don't turn around." I froze, my heart jolting like I'd swallowed ice. I hadn't even thought of turning around until he said it. My fingers tightened around the receiver, and my bike seemed suddenly too far away, even though it was right at my side. I tried to laugh it off, forcing a shaky, "Very funny, Dad, you got me." But he didn't laugh. He didn't even sound like he was smiling. He said it again, sharper this time, "Don't turn around." My first instinct was to slam the receiver down and run, but my hand wouldn't move, not really. I kept it pressed to my ear, as though I couldn't risk letting go. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm right here," he said. And the thing that made my stomach drop was the hollow echo that followed his words. It wasn't the kind of echo you get from a big room. It was the echo of a voice traveling through a tiny metal box, the exact echo I was hearing from my side of the payphone. I jerked forward instinctively, turning my head before I even realized I was doing it. But the payphone was bolted to the wall, and the only reflection I had was the greasy pane of glass in the booth. There was no one behind me. The street was empty. I heard my father's breathing still in the receiver, heavy, matching my own. "Dad, stop it. Just stop," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You need to leave," he said. "Don't come home yet." That stopped me cold. It wasn't just the strangeness of the warning, it was the fact that if this really was my father, he never would have told me not to come home. He would have driven out to get me himself. And if it wasn't him, then who was it? I hung up, the clatter of the receiver sounding too loud in the stillness. My legs were already moving before I even decided what to do. I grabbed my bike and pedaled so hard that my thighs burned. But the whole way back, every time I glanced behind me, I felt certain that someone was there, pacing me, just out of sight. When I reached our house, I didn't bother being quiet. I banged through the door, calling out for my parents. My mother was in the kitchen, startled by the noise, and when my dad appeared from the hallway, wiping his hands on a rag, everything inside me nearly collapsed in relief. He looked confused when I ran straight to him. "Why'd you say that to me?" I asked, breathless. "On the phone, at the station, you told me not to turn around." His face hardened in a way I didn't expect. He shook his head, slow at first, then more firmly. "I've been here all night. Haven't answered the phone once." My mother frowned, glancing between us. "What are you talking about? What happened?" I couldn't explain it without sounding ridiculous, so I just shook my head, trying to convince myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I went to my room, I couldn't shake the echo of his voice the way it matched the payphone so perfectly. A week later, curiosity gnawed at me enough to go back. I told myself I was being silly, that maybe some stranger had picked up and played a cruel joke. But the moment I reached the booth, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Scratched into the metal panel just beneath the receiver were the words, "Don't turn around." The letters were shallow but jagged, like someone had carved them in with desperation. I ran my fingers over the grooves, my pulse hammering. Someone else had heard the same words, maybe more than one someone, maybe over years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the call, the hiss of the line, the strange certainty in his voice. I started wondering what would have happened if I had turned around right then, completely, instead of half glancing at the glass. What would I have seen? The thought burrowed deeper as days passed. I tried telling myself to let it go, but the payphone burned in my mind like a magnet. Eventually, I biked back again, this time in daylight, as though the sun might make it less terrifying. I stood there with coins in my palm, staring at the scratched words. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I fed the coins into the slot and dialed our house again. It rang once. Hello? It was my father again, but this time his voice was broken, trembling. Why are you back? My chest seized. What do you mean, why am I back? You weren't supposed to return. You'll let it through now, he said, his words stumbling out like he was fighting to say them. What's it? I demanded. The line crackled so loudly I had to hold the receiver away. And then, underneath the static, I heard another voice, a low one, almost like a growl, shaping itself into words I couldn't quite understand, but I felt them. They pressed against my skin, made my hands shake. I dropped the phone and backed away. The receiver swung on its cord, thumping the metal, the voice still spilling out in fragments I couldn't stand to hear. I grabbed my bike and bolted, this time not looking back at all. At home, I locked the door of my room and pressed my hands to my ears, but I swore I could still hear it, like the sound had lodged itself inside me. The next morning, I told my father everything. He listened in silence, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made me think he knew more than he said. When I finished, he only put a hand on my shoulder and told me not to ever go back there. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. Years later, after I'd moved away, I came back through Invercargill for a visit. The station was still there, though the sign had been replaced, brighter and cleaner. The payphone was gone. Just a blank patch of wall remained. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead there was a hollow ache, because even though the booth was gone, I knew whatever had been on the other end of that line hadn't disappeared. It was waiting somewhere, patient, rehearsing my father's voice, practicing those same 3 words until someone new gave it a chance. And when I think about it now, what terrifies me most isn't what I heard, it's the certainty that one night someone else will pick up, hear that voice, and decide to turn around. Story number 6. I swiped my card at the pump, waited for the beep, and tried to keep my daughter entertained in the back seat while the tank filled. It was just a routine stop, the kind of thing I'd done 100 times before. I remember glancing at my phone to check the balance afterward, something I always did since money was tight, and that's when I saw the first charge. It matched the purchase I'd just made, but right beneath it was another identical transaction, time-stamped 5 minutes ahead. At first I thought it was a glitch. Banking apps have hiccups, right? But then, before I could even drive away, another one appeared. Another identical payment logged 10 minutes into the future. My throat went dry. I looked at the pump again, checked the receipt in my hand. It showed the single payment I knew I'd made. Yet my phone kept pinging with notifications, one after another, each creeping further ahead into time I hadn't even lived yet. I told myself to stay calm for my daughter's sake, but I felt my stomach knotting up. I walked back inside the station, holding my receipt out to the attendant. "Excuse me, there's something wrong with your system. My card's showing multiple charges." He barely looked up from the register, muttered, "Happens sometimes. It'll reverse in a day or two." His voice was flat, too flat, like he'd said those exact words too many times before. I pressed him harder, asking if he could check the terminal, if there had been any errors. That's when he finally looked at me, really looked, and the stare unsettled me more than the charges. His eyes didn't show irritation or surprise, but recognition, as though he'd been waiting for me to say this. "They already posted?" he asked, and his tone wasn't one of confusion but of grim confirmation. I grabbed my daughter's hand and left the shop without another word. I didn't want to argue in front of her. Sitting back in the driver's seat, I tried to breathe. 3 charges now. The app showed them as pending, but the timestamps were spreading out in neat little 5-minute intervals, like appointments I hadn't scheduled. I started the car and drove off. but I couldn't stop staring at the screen. Another charge appeared exactly when the timer hit. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following us, though the road was empty. Every time the clock on my dashboard reached the minute listed on my phone, my pulse hammered in my ears. 4 transactions, then 5. Each one felt like a countdown to something, though I didn't know what. My daughter asked me why I kept looking at my phone, and I just told her I was watching directions. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I pulled into a small parking lot near a grocery store and tried calling the bank. The automated system confirmed the charges. When I finally got through to a person, I explained what was happening, my voice rising with each word. The woman on the other end fell silent for too long. Finally, she said, "I'm going to transfer you to another department." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone like it had betrayed me. Another notification buzzed through. Same amount, same gas station, time stamped another 5 minutes into the future. My daughter leaned forward from the back seat, her small voice asking if we were going home. I told her yes, even though I wasn't sure I believed it. By the time I reached my street, the 6th charge had appeared. My house looked the same as it always had, but it felt like I was pulling into a stranger's driveway. I got her inside, turned on the TV for her, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone laid out like a loaded weapon. Every 5 minutes, without fail, another purchase appeared. 10 charges. 15. I could feel my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table just to ground myself. I tried calling the gas station, but no one answered. When I looked up the number again, the listing showed temporarily closed. I knew I'd just been there. I still had the receipt, still smelled the faint trace of gasoline on my hands. Yet the place already seemed erased. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the glow of my phone as the charges stacked up like some relentless clockwork. They went past midnight, each 5 minutes apart, each draining the same amount from an account that couldn't afford it. I called the bank again, desperate, and finally someone picked up. But this voice was different, low, steady, and it said my name before I gave it. "You should have left after the first one," the man said, and then hung up. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My daughter stirred in the bedroom, and for a moment I thought about waking her, getting in the car, and just driving until the road ended. But where would we go? And what if the charges followed me there too? By morning, my account balance was nearly drained. Every 5 minutes, like clockwork, another piece of my money vanished into that station that now supposedly didn't exist. I went back, dragging my daughter with me because I didn't dare leave her behind. The station looked exactly the same from a distance, the same peeling signs and quiet forecourt, but when I pulled up, every pump screen was frozen at the same amount. The exact sum of my charge, multiplied across every display. I left the engine running and stepped inside. The same attendant stood behind the counter, but he didn't blink this time, didn't even pretend to acknowledge me. His eyes were fixed on the register, which scrolled my name across its screen over and over again, paired with the words, "Approved." I slammed my receipt down, demanded he stop whatever system was eating my account, but he didn't move. Only his lips twitched, and he whispered something that made my chest seize. "You're almost out of time." I ran back to the car, shoved it into gear, and sped off. My daughter was crying in the back, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't explain it without breaking down. I just kept driving, past intersections, past familiar streets, until the city itself seemed to thin out around me. My phone buzzed one more time, but this time the charge didn't say pending. It was marked final. The account was empty, completely drained. But instead of relief that it might stop, a deeper terror washed over me, because I realized something. I hadn't been paying for gas at all. Every transaction wasn't fuel, it was time. My dashboard clock froze at that exact moment. The second hand stuck mid-tick. The car coasted forward without speed, like it was gliding on glass. Outside the windows, everything stilled the traffic. The trees, even my daughter's cries, froze in her throat. And in the reflection on the windshield, I saw the attendant's face staring back at me, smiling faintly as though I've been waiting for me to understand. I don't remember screaming, but my throat ached afterward, raw and empty. The car jolted suddenly, the world lurched back into motion, and my daughter gasped like she'd been underwater. But the phone in my hand was dead, the screen black, as if it had never existed. When I got home, I checked my account again on the laptop. It didn't show negative balance, it didn't even show zero. It showed nothing, like the account had never belonged to me. My name wasn't recognized, my details erased. I tried calling the bank again, but the line just played static. For days, I lived in that state of half-dread, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I stopped using cards altogether, started paying cash for everything, afraid to leave any trail. But that fear didn't protect me. Because on the 5th day, a letter came in the mail, addressed not to me, but to my daughter. It listed every one of those transactions, each one labeled not as fuel purchase, but as life withdrawal. The bottom line showed zero remaining. I wanted to tear it up, pretend it never arrived, but she saw it before I could. She looked at me with wide, questioning eyes, asking what it meant, and I didn't have an answer. That night I watched her sleep, the rise and fall of her chest, the only thing tethering me to sanity. I kept waiting for the stillness, the silence, to come for her the way it had tried to come for me. I promised myself I wouldn't let it. I'd fight it, even if I didn't know how. It's been weeks now, and no new charges have appeared. But sometimes, every 5 minutes on the dot, I feel something shift in the room. The clock will hesitate, the air will thicken, and I'll catch sight of a reflection that isn't mine. Each time, I grip her tighter, whispering to her that everything is okay. But I know better. I know I paid with something I can't get back, and I know the receipt wasn't for gas, it was for me. And one day, maybe, 5 minutes from now, maybe 5 years, they're going to collect what's left. Story number 7. I was already halfway through the ride home when my throat dried out so badly I couldn't swallow. I'd been biking from a friend's house across town, coasting through quiet streets, when I spotted the small gas station tucked at the corner of an empty road. It wasn't one of the bigger ones, more like a convenience shack with 2 pumps and a narrow glass front. I figured I'd just run in, grab a bottle of water, and keep going. Nothing unusual. I leaned my bike against the side, unchained my wallet from the strap of my backpack, and pushed open the door. The bell overhead chimed, and the air inside smelled faintly like rubber and stale bread. There was only one person in sight, the attendant behind the counter. He stood completely upright, both hands resting on the counter, staring at the entrance. His eyes met mine the second I stepped in. At first I thought he was just alert, the way clerks sometimes watch to see who's walking in. But as I walked past the shelves and toward the coolers, I realized something odd. He wasn't shifting his gaze, not even for a moment. I bent down, pulled a water bottle from the fridge, and turned. His eyes were still locked on me, wide, unblinking. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just zoning out. People did that. Still, the longer it went on, the more uncomfortable I felt. I walked slowly up to the counter, set the bottle down, and waited for him to react. He didn't. His eyes tracked mine, steady as glass, pupils fixed. The fluorescent light above his head reflected off his eyes in a way that made them look slick, like marbles. Just this," I muttered, pushing the bottle closer to him. He didn't move at first. Then, with a jerky motion, his right hand slid to the scanner, beeped the bottle, and returned to its place on the counter. His eyes never broke from mine. He recited the price in a flat, toneless voice. No blink, no shift, just that cold stare. I fumbled with the coins in my pocket, trying to act casual, but my hands were trembling more than they should have been. I slid the money across. He didn't reach forward, not the way cashiers normally do. Instead, his fingers stretched out stiffly, like he wasn't bending his knuckles, and pulled the coins in. Then he dropped them into the till without looking down once. He handed me the change, his arm extending straight, mechanical, still staring, not one blink. "Thanks," I said quickly, clutching the bottle. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he was making me uneasy, so I tried to look away, scanning the shelves behind him. But something made me glance back, and when I did, his pupils had widened. Not in the natural way eyes adjust, they just snapped larger, like camera shutters clicking open. My stomach turned. I turned away, walked fast to the door, and yanked it open so hard the bell clanged against the frame. As I pushed out, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass door. Or, at least, I should have. But my reflection wasn't there. There was the street, the pumps, my bike leaning against the wall. Even his reflection was faintly visible behind me. But mine, nothing. Just empty space where I should have been standing. My heart hammered in my throat. I stepped aside and looked again, thinking maybe the angle was weird, maybe the glass was warped. But no matter where I stood, there was nothing. My reflection was gone. I grabbed my bike so fast it nearly toppled, swung onto the seat, and pedaled hard down the street. The cold air burned my lungs, and my hands shook on the handlebars. I didn't look back at the station, not once, until I was nearly a mile away. And even then, when I glanced over my shoulder, the street behind me looked darker than it should have, like the gas station wasn't lit anymore, even though I knew I'd left the bright fluorescent lights glowing inside. When I finally made it home, I burst through the door and went straight to a hallway mirror. I expected relief, expected to see myself there, tired, sweaty, shaking. But when I looked, for a terrifying second, the mirror showed only the room behind me, empty. My stomach dropped. I staggered back, blinking hard, rubbing my eyes. And then, suddenly, my reflection snapped into place like it had been waiting to load. My chest heaved, and I nearly collapsed. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, dehydrated, maybe hallucinating. But that didn't explain the attendant, or his eyes, or the missing reflection at the glass door. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured his stare, those pupils snapping wide, his body stiff like a mannequin. And the worst part was, I couldn't stop thinking about the glass door. About how my reflection hadn't been missing everywhere, just there, in that one place. The next day, against every instinct I had, I biked back. I told myself I needed proof, that maybe I'd just imagined it. It was late, afternoon this time, and the station was quiet again. My bike tires crunched against the gravel as I pulled up. The building looked ordinary, almost too ordinary, like it wanted to blend into the street. I chained my bike and walked up, trying to steady my breath. Inside, the bell chimed again, but the counter was empty. No attendant. The register was open, a stack of receipts spilling over the side. I called out, "Hello," but my voice sounded too loud in the cramped space. I walked over to the cooler again, just to see if anything felt familiar. My throat was dry again, but I ignored it. My eyes went to the counter. Something was different. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a sheet of paper covered with rows of names. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each with a date next to them. My stomach tightened as I stepped closer. Near the bottom, my name was there. My full name, spelled correctly. The date was yesterday. I stumbled back so fast I knocked over a rack of candy bars. They spilled across the floor with a hollow slap. I didn't pick them up. I bolted for the door, and that's when I saw it again. My reflection was gone. Right there in the glass, same as before, nothing but the street and the empty pumps. I yanked the door open, but as I stepped outside, I froze. The pumps weren't empty anymore. Every single one had a person standing there, frozen in mid-action, hoses in their hands, but none of them moving. They weren't breathing, they weren't blinking. Their eyes were all fixed on me. I ran to my bike, nearly tripping over my own feet, and kicked off down the road. I didn't look back this time. I didn't care if cars came. I swerved straight through intersections, legs burning, lungs tearing open. When I reached my house, I slammed the door and locked it, then collapsed on the floor with tears in my eyes. I stayed there for hours, listening, waiting for something to happen. That night, I couldn't bring myself to check the mirror again. I just crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over my head like I was a child. But sleep never came. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every shadow in the corner of my eye felt like someone standing there, watching me. I swore I could still feel his eyes locked on mine. By morning, I tried again. I dragged myself to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and forced myself to look at the mirror. At first, my reflection was there. Pale, hollow-eyed, but there. Relief surged through me. But as I stared, my reflection didn't move with me. My head tilted slightly. The reflection didn't follow. It stared back with that same glassy, wide-eyed look, and then it stopped blinking. I screamed and smashed the mirror with my fist. Glass shattered across the sink, blood running down my knuckles. I don't know if that solved anything. I don't know if it stopped whatever was trying to take me. But I know this. I never went back to that station again. I still avoid that road, even years later. And whenever I walk past a glass door, I look for my reflection. Most times it's there, but sometimes, just sometimes, it takes a second too long to appear. And in those moments, I remember his stare. I remember that sheet of names, and I wonder how many more doors have my name waiting. Story number 8. I was already exhausted when I pulled into that little gas station on the outskirts of Perth, sometime after midnight. My car had been rattling for the last 20 miles, and I needed to stretch my legs, use the bathroom, and maybe grab a bottle of water before I drove the rest of the way north. I wasn't supposed to be out that late, not alone, not with my nerves already worn thin from dealing with stares and muttered comments earlier in the day, but I told myself it was fine. It was just a gas station. Safe, familiar, ordinary. That's what I believed as I parked, locked the doors, and headed inside. The shop itself was nearly empty, just the buzz of a vending cooler and the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere behind the counter. There was a man at the register, maybe in his 50s, heavy-set, his hands folded on the counter as though he'd been sitting like that all night. He didn't say a word when I walked in, just tracked me with his eyes. I felt the weight of it, but I forced a polite nod and made my way toward the back, where the restroom sign pointed. The hallway smelled strange before I even reached the door. Not the usual stale cleaning product smell of gas station bathrooms. This was chemical, oily, sharp. It stung my nose. When I pushed the bathroom door open, I stopped dead. The entire tiled floor glistened dark and slick. Diesel. The smell punched me in the face, almost metallic, heavy, choking. Someone had poured it everywhere, the puddles seeping under the stalls and across the floor like spreading ink. I pulled my sleeve to my face, gagging, and took a step back, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe this bathroom was closed and I hadn't seen a sign. But there was no "out of order" taped to the door, no explanation at all, just the reek of fuel. Behind me, the man from the counter was suddenly there, blocking the hallway. He must have moved fast, because I hadn't even heard him approach. "Don't be frightened," he said, his voice low and almost calm. His eyes were steady on mine, unblinking. "It's to keep the spirits away." I remember staring at him, confused, because what spirits? Why here? Why pour gallons of diesel into a public bathroom in the middle of the night? He didn't elaborate. He just stood there, his bulk filling the hallway, his hand gripping the edge of the doorframe, like he had no intention of letting me pass unless he decided to. I managed to choke out, "I just need to use the toilet." My voice was smaller than I wanted it to be. He tilted his head, almost sympathetic, then stepped aside and gestured toward the mess inside as if to say, "Go on then." Obviously I couldn't. The diesel wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. One spark, one cigarette, and the whole place would go up. I muttered that I'd wait, maybe use the facilities elsewhere, and edged past him back toward the shop. He didn't stop me, but I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my neck the whole way down the hallway. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, paid quickly, and forced myself to walk steadily to the car, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. When I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, I finally let my breath out. I locked the doors, started the engine, and tried to shake it off. Just some eccentric old man, I told myself. Some nonsense about spirits, some deranged ritual. I'd drive away, never think of it again. Except when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I froze. My tires, each one was smeared dark with diesel. Fresh stains glistened on the rubber, streaked in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. The puddles in the bathroom hadn't been random, they had led somewhere. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I rolled the window down slightly. The smell confirmed it. The chemical tang was stronger now, clinging to my car. Someone had poured it under or around my wheels while I was inside. My skin crawled. I hadn't been in the bathroom more than a minute, and the man had been right there in the hallway. So who had done it? Or worse, had he done it before I even arrived? I shifted the car into reverse, my eyes flicking to the station windows. He was standing there at the register again, perfectly still, watching me leave. I drove faster than I should have down the empty road, the tires humming, every muscle in my body locked tight. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting headlights to follow, but the road stayed empty behind me. After a few miles, I pulled over onto the shoulder, heart pounding, and got out to check the tires. The diesel had streaked down into the grooves, wet and shining under the faint glow of my hazard lights. The smell clung to me as I crouched, my fingers trembling just above the rubber. Whoever had done it wanted me to notice. They wanted me to carry it with me. That's when I saw the footprints. Small, sharp-edged, oily marks stamped into the gravel near my rear tires. They weren't shoe prints, they were bare feet, small like a child's, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, too spread out, like they'd gripped the ground. And there were dozens of them, crisscrossing around the back of my car, all pressed in fresh diesel. My stomach dropped, and I scrambled back into the car, locking the doors again, even though it felt absurd out there in the middle of nowhere. I hit the gas and sped off, gravel spitting behind me. The rest of the drive is a blur. My chest ached from holding my breath, my eyes darting constantly to the roadside, to every flicker of shadow or movement. By the time I reached a larger town, I pulled into a lit supermarket parking lot and sat there, shaking, until the adrenaline began to ebb. The tires still stank of diesel. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. I stayed in the driver's seat, hugging myself, trying to make sense of what had happened. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That a man poured fuel in a bathroom and told me it was for spirits? that my tires were smeared with diesel by invisible hands, they'd laugh me off, or worse, think I was unstable. The next morning, in daylight, it all looked smaller. The footprints were gone, maybe soaked back into the ground, or faded when the fuel evaporated. The tires were still stained, but less stark, just oily streaks that could have been from any old puddle. Part of me wanted to write it off as fatigue and paranoia. But when I drove to a car wash, the attendant frowned while scrubbing at the rubber. He looked at me, uneasy, and said, "It's strange. This stuff, it's soaked deep, like it wasn't just spilled, more like it was painted on." Even now, years later, I can't stop replaying that moment in the hallway. The man's eyes steady on me, his calm voice saying, "It's to keep the spirits away." I've asked myself 100 times whether he was protecting me from Hull, something, or marking me for it. All I know is that the smell of diesel has never been the same for me since. Whenever it hits my nose, my chest tightens, my pulse quickens, and I see those long, oily footprints circling my car in the dark. And every single time I stop for fuel now, no matter where I am, I check the ground around my tires before I step inside. Story number 9. I eased the car into the station lot, more out of habit than need, because the gauge still showed just under half a tank. My daughter was asleep in the passenger seat, her head tilted against the window, hair sticking slightly to the glass. The place looked ordinary enough, a small station with maybe 6 pumps, but something about how empty it was at that hour unsettled me. It wasn't late, maybe around 9 in the evening, and yet no other cars were around. I pulled up to one of the pumps, shut the engine off, and that was when I noticed something that made me pause. The digital display was already on, not just on, but showing my exact car plate number. At first, I thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it was just coincidence, some random set of letters and numbers that looked similar. I leaned closer, squinting, and no, it was mine, character for character. I felt this cold flush run down my arms, the kind of sensation that tells you something isn't right, before you can even rationalize why. I tried another pump, rolling forward a bit. Same thing. My plate number glowing faintly on the screen, as if the machine had been waiting for me. I tapped the glass, wondering if it was some kind of new tracking system. Ireland in the 90s wasn't exactly known for cutting-edge tech at petrol stations, and I'd never seen anything like it. Still, I forced myself to brush it off. Maybe it was connected to the till inside somehow. Maybe the attendant had typed it in for records. I got out, trying not to wake my daughter, and went to grab the nozzle. That's when I realized it wasn't locked. Pumps always have that little click, that bit of resistance before you start fueling, but this one was loose. It swung freely in my hand, as if it had already been used and never reset. The smell of fuel hung thick, stronger than it should have been, and I glanced around the lot again. No one, no cars, no sound of traffic from the nearby road, which I could have sworn had been busy just minutes earlier. I felt eyes on me though. Not the friendly kind, more like the stillness in the air was watching, waiting. I placed the nozzle back, wiped my palms on my trousers, and thought about just getting back in the car. When I tugged on the handle to my door, a loud metallic bang echoed behind me. I spun around. The shutters of the small shop attached to the station had dropped down, slamming shut like someone had pulled a lever inside. Another bang followed, then another, as one by one, the other shutters came down over every entrance, every window. The sound rolled across the lot, hollow and final. My daughter stirred in her seat, blinking awake, and I tried to school my face into something calm before she caught my panic. "Daddy? What's happening?" she asked, voice groggy. "Nothing, love. Just the station closing up for the night," I lied, though my voice cracked. I checked the door again. Locked. I hadn't locked it, but the paranormal mechanism wouldn't budge. I pressed the unlock button inside, yanked at the handle, nothing. It was as though the car itself had decided I wasn't leaving. My daughter reached across to try her side. Stuck. We shared a look, her eyes wide, searching mine for reassurance I couldn't give. I tried shouting, banging on the glass of the station shop. No one answered. The lot stayed silent. My frustration turned to desperation when I noticed the pump screens again. The numbers had changed. Instead of my license plate, they now displayed words, "Inside." All 6 pumps said the same thing, glowing letters scrolling slowly, over and over. Inside, inside, inside. My daughter started crying softly, asking if we should go. Go where? The shutters had sealed everything. Even the small side door was covered. I thought about smashing a window, but something deep in me warned against it. The silence outside felt too absolute, like the moment I broke it, something would respond. Something I couldn't fight. I told her to stay in the car, grabbed the tire iron from the boot, and approached the shop. The pumps kept repeating their message, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. I knocked again, harder this time, and that was when the shutter in front of me lifted a few inches on its own, just enough for me to crouch down and crawl under. I froze. This was what it wanted. I didn't know how I knew, but the certainty of it pressed against my chest. The invitation wasn't for me. Not really. It was bait. I glanced back at the car. My daughter's face was pressed against the glass, eyes streaming, mouthing, "Don't." I should have listened. But the fuel smell was making me dizzy, and the thought of being trapped out there with no answers pushed me forward. I dropped to my knees, slid under, and rose on the other side. The shutter clanged shut behind me. The shop lights flickered once, then steadied. Everything inside looked normal. Shelves of crisps, racks of sweets, a humming fridge. But there was no attendant, no sound at all, except the low buzz of electricity. I called out, voice shaking, and got nothing back. I moved behind the counter, hoping for a phone, anything. There was a handset there, black and old. I lifted it. Dead. Not even static. I heard movement then. Not footsteps, more like a scraping, dragging sound. It came from the back room. The door was half ajar, a faint yellow light spilling out. My throat tightened. Part of me screamed to run back to the shutter, to claw my way out, but another part knew I wouldn't be allowed. I pushed the door open. The back room was lined with shelves of stock, but that wasn't what caught me. On the floor, in the middle, was a small TV set, switched on, screen glowing. It played live footage of the lot outside, my car, my daughter inside, except she wasn't alone. On the grainy feed, I saw her in the back seat now, curled against the window, while something sat in the driver's seat. A shape, hunched, faceless, hands on the wheel. My heart nearly stopped. I staggered closer to the TV, whispering her name like it could reach her. The figure turned its head slowly toward the camera. Toward me. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just bolted back through the shop. The shutter rose just as I reached it, almost mocking me, and I threw myself under. I sprinted to the car, yanking the back door. This time it opened. I pulled her out, clutching her to my chest, shaking all over. The front seats were empty. We didn't stop running. Past the pumps, past the edge of the lot, down the dark stretch of road until headlights finally appeared and another car slowed for us. I waved frantically, nearly collapsing when the driver rolled down the window and asked if we needed help. I told him everything, babbling, but when we looked back, the station wasn't there. Just an empty patch of tarmac where it should have stood. Years have passed, but I've never shaken the memory. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I catch numbers glowing faintly on passing signs, my plate number, flickering like it's waiting to be called again. And every time I stop for petrol, I watch the pumps. If they so much as blink on before I touch them, I get back in the car and drive, no matter how empty my tank is. Because I know what waits if I don't. Story number 10. I was already gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have when the headlights washed over the small gas station at the edge of Sudbury. The power had gone out across most of the city, but this place glowed faintly, lit by one stubborn generator that hummed like a distant saw. I pulled in because my tank was nearly empty, and the thought of running out of gas on those quiet backroads terrified me more than being stranded under those dim, flickering lights. I told myself it would be quick, just pay, fill up, and get back on the road. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt oddly heavy, like the kind of silence that comes after a fight. The pumps weren't digital like the new ones downtown. These were the old analog dials that ticked with a clunky rhythm. I grabbed the nozzle, slid it into the tank, and listened to the slow gurgle of fuel. Every sound felt magnified. My breathing, the click of the numbers rolling on the pump, the faint hum of the generator rattling from behind the building. Halfway through, I glanced toward the glass door. The attendant was standing perfectly still behind the counter, his face pale under a halo of fluorescent light. He was watching me, not in the casual way you glance at a customer, but fixed eyes narrowed, hands on the counter, head tilted like he was waiting for me to do something. I tried to shrug it off, finishing the fill-up quickly, but the hairs on the back of my neck prickled the whole time. When the pump clicked, I slipped the nozzle back into place and walked into the store. The bell above the door didn't ring. I noticed it only after it had already closed behind me, leaving me in a silence so sharp I could hear my own footsteps echo against the floor. He didn't move as I approached. His gaze followed me, his jaw tight. "I'd like to pay," I said, sliding my card from my wallet. My voice sounded too loud. The man blinked slowly, then shook his head. "Already settled." I froze. "No, I haven't paid yet." I held up the card as proof, though my hand trembled slightly. "You did," he said flatly, pulling a small slip from under the counter. He slid it across the glass, his fingers lingering too long. "Receipt." I glanced down. The paper was old style, printed in faint blue ink, with the numbers typed cleanly. But what made my stomach flip was the line at the bottom. "Paid in full. Thank you, Claire." My name. My exact name, spelled correctly. I hadn't told him. I looked back at him sharply. How did you know my name?" He didn't answer. His lips stretched into the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all, just a straight line pulled too tight. I swallowed hard and pushed the receipt back toward him. "No, I haven't paid. That's not mine. You need to run my card." The man's voice came low, almost a whisper. "You don't need to. It's taken care of." I wanted to argue, but my legs felt restless, twitching. To leave. The air in that little shop pressed in on me. Too warm, too close. I reached for the door, but his voice cut through again. "You should go, now." I didn't think, I just left. The door swung shut behind me, still no bell. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my throat. I slid into the car, locked the doors immediately, and shoved the receipt into the passenger seat without looking at it again. The drive out of the lot felt endless. The rearview mirror kept pulling my attention, but the store looked the same. Faintly lit, the man still behind the glass. Watching, my fingers tightened on the wheel. I pressed the accelerator harder than I should have, desperate to leave that stretch of highway behind. It wasn't until 5 minutes later, when I finally slowed, that I noticed the gas gauge. Full. Completely full. I had only pumped $10 worth, but the needle sat firmly at the top. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe the meter was broken? Maybe the gauge had jammed? I tried to dismiss it, but the more I stared, the more I knew something was wrong. I reached for the receipt, crumpled on the seat beside me. The letters had shifted. They weren't faint blue anymore. They were darker, almost ink black, and the date read not tonight but tomorrow. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m., exactly 3 minutes from where the clock on my dashboard sat now. My stomach turned to ice. I pulled onto the shoulder and sat there, car rumbling softly, staring at that slip of paper until my eyes burned. The seconds crawled forward, dragging me toward that time. At 11:47 sharp, my headlights flickered off. The dashboard went dark. The car engine sputtered and died as though the battery had been yanked out. I sat in a bubble of silence, the only sound my panicked breathing. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind me, I heard the low hum of a generator. My hands shook as I turned in the seat. Far in the distance, maybe a mile back, a pale glow shimmered the same. Gas station, standing exactly as I had left it, only I'd been driving away from it for 10 minutes. I stumbled out of the car, desperate for distance, but the night pressed in, heavy, smothering. My footsteps crunched against gravel, though I couldn't see the shoulder anymore. Just the glow, faint but unwavering. I should have run the other direction, but every step carried me back toward it like gravity. My throat felt dry, my chest tight. When I reached the lot, the pumps stood waiting, their dials all frozen at 0. My car wasn't there, though I swore I hadn't walked far enough to lose it. The door swung open before I touched it. Inside, the man stood exactly as before, both hands on the counter staring at me. "You paid," he said again, sliding another receipt across. This one was blank except for 3 words: "You don't leave." My heart thundered so violently, I thought I might collapse. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. His lips curved again, tighter, stretching the skin at the corners. "I don't want, I keep." I staggered back, but the door behind me had shut without sound. I twisted the knob, pulled hard it wouldn't budge. The air smelled faintly of gasoline, sharp and sweet, filling my lungs. I coughed, eyes watering, and when I turned back, the shelves in the store had changed. No snacks, no drinks, no trinkets. Only rows of paper receipts, stacked high, every one stamped with a name. Thousands of them. I searched frantically until my eyes landed on the closest pile. Each slip bore dates stretching years back: 1972, 1965, 1951, every name neatly typed, every purchase marked "paid in full." My hands shook as I rifled through them, and then I froze. On the top of one stack, fresh ink glistened: "Paid in full, Claire, 1980. I dropped it, heart racing, and looked up. The man had moved closer, though I hadn't seen him walk. He was inches away, eyes flat, the smell of gasoline stronger now. I stumbled, backward, desperate, but the floor gave way beneath me. I fell hard, not onto tiles but onto gravel. My hands scraped against the sharp stones. I blinked up my car, sat idling a few feet away, headlights on, dashboard glowing as though nothing had happened. My chest rose and fell in violent, shuddering breaths. I staggered to my feet, scrambled inside, and slammed the door shut. The gauge still read full. The receipt still lay on the passenger seat, but it had changed again. This time it said only, "Drive, don't stop." I didn't hesitate. I pressed the accelerator and sped down that road, not daring to check the mirror again. Every shadow on the shoulder looked like the station's glow. Every hum of the tires sounded like that generator. I drove until the sky lightened faintly, until the first signs of morning shimmered ahead. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the gauge still hadn't moved. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, and my eyes burned from not blinking. I stumbled inside, clutching the receipt so hard the paper tore. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, but a sick certainty stopped me. I placed it in a drawer instead, slammed it shut, and promised myself never to open it. For days, I refused to drive. The car sat full, the tank never dipping, no matter how much time passed. I couldn't explain it. I still can't. But I know this: that gas station isn't gone. Every now and then, late at night, I hear the faint hum of a generator outside my window, and I know if I looked, I'd see its pale glow waiting. And I don't. Because if I ever do, I don't think I'll come back again. Story number 11. I was closing up the library when I first noticed the lanterns. Halloween night, 1980. Windermere wasn't much of a town: one main street, 2 pubs, and the library I'd managed for 12 years. The parade had just ended, and the children's laughter still echoed faintly as they scattered home, costumes dragging through fallen leaves. I stood by the front window, locking up, when the row of lanterns hanging along the high street began to flicker. Not randomly together. Each one dimmed and brightened in perfect sync, like they were breathing the same strange rhythm. I remember thinking it looked like Morse code, except the pattern felt too deliberate, too fluid. Then I realized they weren't just flickering, they were forming shapes. Symbols, actually. Ones I'd seen earlier that week when I'd cataloged a dusty old manuscript titled The Language of the Hollowed. The thought made my stomach tighten. That book had come in through donation, unsigned, its pages brittle and ink faded. It was more of a curiosity than a text, full of circular markings and cryptic notations I couldn't translate. I'd shelved it in the local history section 2 days ago and hadn't thought about it since, until now. I stared at the lanterns glowing outside, watching the same strange runes repeat in their dance of light. My first instinct was to grab my coat and step outside. Windermere was always quiet, but that night the silence felt charged, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I looked up and down the street. No one else seemed to notice the last few parade-goers were heading home, chatting idly, their laughter trailing off. But I couldn't shake the pull. I walked down the steps and stood beneath one of the lanterns, watching it pulse faintly. My breath fogged in front of me as I traced the rhythm in my mind: 3 long flashes, 2 short, 1 long. I remember whispering to myself, I've seen this before. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had. In that damned manuscript, the same pattern marked the opening page, drawn in faded red ink, right beside the phrase, "The light calls its own." I told myself it was coincidence, some electrical glitch, or maybe a prank. But then I noticed something else. The last flicker of the final lantern stopped precisely at the corner where Moore Street began. And that's where I saw them 3 children, still in costume, standing dead still, looking toward me. I recognized them from earlier that evening. The Cartwright twins and little Benny Holt. They'd been laughing together during the parade, their masks crooked and candy spilling from paper bags. Now, though, they were silent. I waved, half smiling to hide my unease. "All right, kids, parade's over, you heading home?" No reply. The twins tilted their heads slightly, like they were listening to something. Benny clutched his bag tighter. Then, one by one, they turned and walked down Moore Street. I started to call out again, but something in me froze. It was the way the lanterns followed them, flickering in that same rhythm, as though the light itself was escorting them into the dark. That night, I barely slept. The symbols burned behind my eyelids, repeating every time I closed my eyes. Around 3 a.m., I gave in and went back to the library. I told myself it was to check the manuscript, to confirm it was all in my head. The streets were empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy, electric, like a storm without thunder. Inside, the library smelled faintly of old dust, and something else I couldn't name, like burnt wax. I unlocked the archive cabinet, flipped open The Language of the Hollowed, and found the page instantly. The same series of marks I'd seen in the lanterns, the same pattern of light. But someone had written new words beneath the symbols since I last saw it. The ink was wet. It said, "3 have heard. The path is open." I remember stepping back. So fast my chair toppled. My hands shook. As I touched the page, the ink smeared slightly under my fingers, fresh and real. But who could have written it? The library had been locked. I lived alone. And only I had the key to that cabinet. I started flipping through the rest of the book. Every few pages had new writing, as if the text was updating itself, translating. Words formed out of nowhere. Names shape the light. Light finds the names. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision pulse. I closed the book and locked it again, trying to steady my breathing. The next morning, Windermere woke to news that chilled the whole town. The Cartwright twins and Benny Holt hadn't come home. Their parents had searched all night, thinking they'd fallen asleep at a friend's house. But no one had seen them since the parade. The police came, combing every alley and field. The only clue was a set of muddy footprints leading toward the marsh, ending abruptly where the ground turned to water. I stood behind the police line, watching the parents cry, and I knew I'd seen the last direction those children went down Moore Street toward that same marsh. That evening, guilt ate at me until I couldn't stand it. I went back to the manuscript. If the symbols meant something, if they pointed to where the children went, I had to understand them. I copied the markings onto a notepad and laid them out in sequence, cross-referencing them with the book's marginal notes. The pattern aligned with 3 street names: Moore, Elm, and Holloway. I froze. That wasn't random. Those were the exact streets where the missing children lived. I checked again. The manuscript's mark seemed to form an old map of Windermere, though distorted, like it was drawn centuries ago. A circle marked the marsh, labeled the hollow. My hands trembled as I traced the outline. That phrase again, "the light calls its own." I should have gone to the police. Instead, I made the worst decision of my life. I went there myself. It was nearly midnight when I reached the edge of the marsh. The town's last lanterns glowed faintly behind me, their light barely reaching the fog. My boots sank into the wet ground. Each step felt heavier, like something was pulling me downward. The air buzzed softly, an unnatural hum, like distant electricity. Then I saw it, the faint glow ahead, deep within the reeds. 3 orbs of light, hovering low, pulsing in that same rhythm I'd seen from the lanterns. "Benny?" My voice came out shaking. "Emma? Luke?" The lights flickered faster at the sound of their names. I stepped closer, my breath catching. Beneath the glow, I saw shapes, small figures half sunk in the mud. Their costumes were drenched, faces hidden behind plastic masks. I fell to my knees, heart pounding, calling their names again. The lights brightened violently. I shielded my eyes, but the sound came next, a whispering, layered and deep, like dozens of voices speaking through each other. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm, the same as the lights. I stumbled backward, tripping over the reeds. When I looked up again, the lights were gone, the children too. Only ripples in the black water remained. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to town, but I burst into the constable's office babbling about lights and the marsh. They searched for hours, found nothing. No bodies, no prints, no sign of anyone. They thanked me for the tip and sent me home, assuming shock had scrambled my memory. But I knew what I saw. I knew the pattern wasn't over. The next morning, the town gathered at the church. The pastor tried to comfort everyone, saying the children would be found. But during the service, the lanterns hanging by the windows began to flicker again. Not just in rhythm this time, they formed letters. Every head turned as the word "return" glowed faintly across the wall in reflected light. Gasps filled the room. the pastor crossed himself. And then, just as suddenly, the lights went out completely. That night, I couldn't stay still. I went back to the library one last time, certain the manuscript held the answer. When I opened the cabinet, it was gone. In its place was my notepad, the one I'd used to copy the symbols. Only now, there was new writing across the pages in my handwriting, but I swear to you, I didn't write it. The words read, "You called them. You opened the light, 3 for 3. My throat went dry. The realization hit me so hard I nearly fell. Those symbols, the book, the lanterns. I hadn't just witnessed them, I'd completed them. By saying the children's names in the marsh, I'd finished whatever ritual the manuscript described. I'd called them into the light. Days passed in a haze. Police questioned me repeatedly, but I told them nothing about the symbols or the book. Who would believe it? The official report said the children likely fell into the marsh and drowned. But no bodies were ever recovered. Their parents left town within the year. Windermere fell quiet again, quieter than before. The parade stopped, the lanterns came down, and Halloween became something people whispered about but never celebrated. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe guilt kept me here. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. Each year after, I noticed small signs, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a faint hum from old light bulbs, the scent of burnt wax when no candles were lit. I tried to ignore them until one Halloween night, 30 years later, it started again. The town had long stopped putting up lanterns, but a few children from the newer families had strung plastic lights along the square. Around 9 o'clock, every light in Windermere flickered once, twice, then began to pulse in that same impossible rhythm. My hands went cold. I could feel my pulse sinking with it, my breath catching in time to the light's beat. And then came the whispers, faint but unmistakable, like children murmuring from just outside the window. I turned and saw their reflections in the glass. Not clear, not detailed, just outlines of small faces behind masks, glowing faintly. I ran outside, shouting into the street, calling their names again, Benny, Emma, Luke. The lights froze mid-flicker, then all went dark at once. My voice echoed through the empty street, swallowed by the fog. That was the last Halloween Windermere ever saw. The next day, people found every light bulb in town shattered from the inside, as if something had burst out rather than in. The electrical lines had melted in sections, though no storm had touched us. They said it was power surge damage, bad wiring, old infrastructure. But I knew better. The town council finally demolished the old library last year. I watched from across the street as the bulldozers tore through what was once the archive room. As the wall crumbled, I saw something glint among the rubble. A small glass lantern, still intact, faintly glowing from within. I didn't stay to see it dim. I packed that night and left Windermere for good. Still, every Halloween, no matter where I am, around midnight the lights in my room will flicker, once, twice, 3 times. Always the same pattern. I've stopped trying to fight it. Sometimes, when it happens, I whisper their names quietly, like an apology. The lights steady for a moment after that, almost as if they're listening. And though I never see them, I swear I can still feel 3 small hands reaching through the dark, searching for the way back home. Story number 12. I first saw the boy outside Mrs. Larkin's store, sitting cross-legged beside a wooden cart full of pumpkins. I remember thinking it was strange. Laura's a small town, but I knew most kids, and I'd never seen him before. The pumpkins were carved already, each with faces that weren't like the usual happy jack-o'-lanterns people made for Halloween. These had twisted mouths, uneven eyes, and teeth that looked like they'd been chiseled, not cut. He had a small sign propped up beside him that said, "Hand-carved, $1 each." His voice was soft when I asked if he'd done them himself. "My dad taught me," he said. "Before he died." That answer made me pause, but I smiled politely and picked one anyway. It was small, with a crooked grin and one eye much larger than the other. The cuts were deep, almost sculpted. I didn't really need it, but something about how carefully he was watching me made me hand over the coin. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll make more next year." When I carried it home, I could still feel his eyes on me from across the road, that blank, heavy stare kids sometimes have when they've seen too much too soon. I set the pumpkin on my front porch beside my other decorations. That night, I lit a candle inside it and watched the flickering face twist as if it was alive. The grin seemed to curl wider the longer I looked. I laughed it off, the flame was just moving. Still, I remember thinking it looked oddly familiar. Not like a person I knew, but like a reaction I'd seen before, someone caught between pain and mockery. The next morning, news spread that old Mrs. Henderson had died, fell down the steps behind the post office. People said her neck broke instantly. When I walked into town, I passed the pumpkin boy again. His cart was half empty now. He looked up and said, "You bought one too?" I nodded, unsure what he meant by two. "She did, you know," he added, motioning toward the bakery where Mrs. Henderson used to volunteer. "She picked the one with the wide mouth." His tone wasn't cruel, just certain, like he was stating a fact. By the third day, half the pumpkins were gone. I started noticing the carvings more. Every one had a strange expression, as if each was based on a real face mid-scream or mid-laugh. I mentioned it to my friend Claire when we were having coffee at the corner cafe. "You mean that quiet boy by the store?" she asked. "He's from the house on Hillview Road. The sculptor's kid. You know, the one who died last winter? Heart attack." I remembered, now his name was Daniel Foster. The father had made stone statues for the local gardens, eerie things with exaggerated eyes and twisted expressions. Claire told me the house had been closed for months. No one knew who was taking care of the boy. That night, I dreamed of my pumpkin. The candle inside it had gone out, but the face was glowing faintly, like there was still something burning deep inside. When I woke up, the smell of burnt wax filled the room. I went to check and saw the candle had melted completely, leaving black streaks that looked like veins running down the pumpkin's face. The following evening, Claire came by. She'd bought one too. She thought it was sweet, supporting the kid. Hers, she said, had a frown and two sharp teeth. We joked that mine looked more like a drunk uncle than a monster. She put hers on the dashboard of her car to take home. The next morning, her brother called me. Claire had crashed near the bridge just outside town. Her car had flipped, and she'd been thrown through the windshield. The coroner said the cause of death was a shard through her cheek, cutting up into her jaw. When I saw her car later that day, it stopped me cold. Her pumpkin had rolled onto the road face up, cracked. The frown carved deeper now, as if it had split from the impact. And those two jagged teeth? They were smeared red. I couldn't shake it anymore. I went back to the boy's cart, but it wasn't there. Just a bit of straw and some pumpkin seeds scattered on the pavement. I went to the house on Hillview Road, that sagging white cottage with the overgrown lawn. The gate creaked open easily. I hesitated on the path, my heart pounding. No one had lived there since the sculptor's death. I remembered the police tape, the shuttered windows. But now I heard something faint, a chipping sound, like stone being carved. I stepped closer. The sound came from the shed behind the house. It was open, tools hanging neatly on the wall, and the smell of damp wood and pumpkin pulp filled the air. Inside, rows of half-carved pumpkins lined the table, all with human expressions, but not random ones. I recognized faces. Claire's furrowed brow, Mrs. Henderson's downturned mouth, Even the mailman, who'd been missing since morning. Each face captured a moment, not death, exactly, but the instant before it. Then I saw the boy, sitting on a stool, carving quietly. He looked up, startled, but not scared. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. His hands were steady, his eyes distant. I asked him where he learned to carve like that. He said, "Dad taught me." He said every face deserves to be remembered the way it felt last. The way he said it made my stomach twist. I asked what that meant, and he pointed to a photograph on the wall, his father, holding a chisel, surrounded by statues. He said, "The stone doesn't lie," the boy continued. "But pumpkins rot, so they have to be real fast." I asked him if he knew what was happening to the people who bought them. He just shrugged. "I don't make them bad," he said. "I just make them how they are. The faces tell me what comes next." His tone was matter-of-fact, almost innocent. "Dad says it's the only way to finish his work." Something about the word finish made me back away. I looked down at the one he was carving. The face was half done, but I recognized it instantly. My nose, my jawline, even the small scar above my lip. My breath caught. "Why are you making that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, eyes wide and strangely sad. "You bought one," he said. I left without another word, half running down the road until I reached the corner. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car. I drove home, heart pounding, sweat cold down my neck. When I got there, I grabbed my pumpkin off the porch and smashed it on the driveway. The face split cleanly, the candle rolling out like a tongue. I felt stupidly relieved, like destroying it might undo everything. But the next day, I woke up with a bruise along my cheekbone. At first, I thought I'd hit it in my sleep, but as the day went on, it darkened into the same curve as the crack in the pumpkin's grin. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I froze. My mouth was twitching, not smiling, not frowning, just pulling, as if some muscle deep under my skin was remembering that carved shape. I went to the police that afternoon. Told them about the boy, the shed, everything. They sent an officer with me to check, but when we got there, the shed was empty. The table was clean, no pumpkins, no tools, no photos. Just a faint smell of rot and a single small chisel lying in the dirt. They said maybe I'd imagined it stress, grief over Claire. The officer even patted my shoulder, said, "There's no boy living there anymore. The foster system moved him months ago." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like the scrape of a blade. Around midnight, I heard something at the front door, a faint thunk. My heart stopped. I forced myself up and looked through the window. A pumpkin sat there, smaller than before, perfectly round, its face blank, just a smooth surface, like untouched clay. No mouth, no eyes, no marks at all. I didn't touch it. I called the police again. They came, looked at it, shrugged, said it was probably kids playing a prank. They took it away. But before they left, I noticed something, a faint line running across the bottom, like the start of a carving. Days passed. I avoided Halloween altogether the following year. No decorations, no candy. I told myself it was over, that whatever curse or madness had followed me had burned out with that smashed pumpkin. Then, about a week before Halloween, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo me, sitting on my porch last year, holding the pumpkin before I smashed it. On the back, written in pencil, "Dad says you're almost finished." I went cold all over. I burned the photo immediately, but I could still feel something shift inside me, a sense that maybe he was right. For weeks, I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing that crooked grin somewhere beneath my real face. My friends said I looked tired, drawn, older, like I was shrinking from the inside out. One afternoon, I drove out toward Hillview Road again. The house was gone, torn down, replaced with a for sale sign on an empty lot. But as I stepped out of the car, I noticed something in the ditch. A small wooden cartwheel, half buried in the dirt. I touched it, and beneath my fingers, I felt grooves, the faint shape of a carved smile. That night, I dreamed again, but it wasn't like before. I was in the shed, sitting on the stool. The boy was standing beside me, handing me a chisel. "It's your turn now," he whispered. "Dad says it's the only way to stop it." I woke up gripping my bedsheet so tightly my knuckles were white. My hand ached like I'd been holding something heavy. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I drove to the edge of town, found a patch of open ground near the old railway, and started digging. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe his father's buried tools, maybe just some proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The earth smelled like rust and rain. After a while, my shovel hit something solid. I knelt down, brushed the dirt away, and found a small wooden box. Inside were photos, dozens of them, every person who'd bought a pumpkin, including me. Their faces were all different, but the expressions matched the carvings. I burned the box right there. Watched the photos curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. I thought that would be the end of it. For a few months, things felt normal. The twitch in my cheek faded. The nightmares stopped. Then, last week, a neighbor knocked on my door. She'd just moved into town, said she was cleaning her new porch. She smiled and held something out. "Found this under the steps," she said. "Must have rolled over from your side." It was small, round, orange. A pumpkin, uncarved. I froze. She laughed, said it'd make a cute decoration. But as I took it from her hands, I saw faint lines beneath the surface. Shallow grooves, almost invisible in daylight. A shape waiting to be finished. And in that moment, I understood what the boy had meant. You can destroy the pumpkins, you can burn the photos, but once he's carved your face, once he's seen you, you're already part of the design. And whether you believe me or not, I know this much now. Every Halloween, somewhere, he's still carving. And one day, I'll wake up to find my face perfectly finished smiling, just the way his father taught him to make it. Hey everyone! Thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.